In 330 CE, in the city of Constantinople, a unique religious political power structure was established, influencing millions of people for over a millennium. This was not a random event, but the result of a combination of imperial authority and religious legitimacy in a model historians call Caesaropapism, where the emperor was both the political leader and the head of the church. Today, we will analyze this system from historical and sociological perspectives to understand how religious power operated in a medieval society and draw important lessons for safeguarding religious rights and individual freedoms in the modern world. If you are interested in learning history as a way to build a fairer future for all, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. Historical knowledge helps us identify and prevent similar patterns of power abuse in the present. To understand why the Caesaropapist system could exist in the Byzantine Empire, we need to look at the context of the 4th to 6th centuries CE. According to research by Dr. John Haldon of Princeton University, this period was characterized by three important factors. First, the political factor. The decline of the Western Roman Empire created a need for centralized power to maintain stability. Emperor Constantine and his successors recognized that Christianity, with its tightly organized structure, could serve as a unifying tool for the empire. Records from Eusebius's Vita Constantini show that Constantine intended to use religion as a political instrument from the very beginning. Second, the social factor. According to Professor Averil Cameron, in the 4th century, around 10% of the empire's population was Christian, and this proportion rapidly increased to 50% by the end of the 6th century. This religious conversion was not purely a natural phenomenon, but was strongly encouraged through preferential policies for Christians and restrictions on other religions. Third, the economic factor. By the 6th century, monasteries and the church owned about 25 to 30% of the empire's land, according to statistics from scholar Michael McCormick. This created a vast network of economic interests tied to religious authority. These conditions allowed Caesaropapism to develop without significant resistance from the ruling classes. It is important to note that Caesaropapism was not unique. In the same period, we see similar models in many other places. In Abyssinia, modern Ethiopia, Christian kings also held both political and religious power from the 4th century. In Tsarist Russia, the idea that the Tsar was God's representative on earth was applied from the 16th century, according to Richard Pipes. Even in Western Europe, although there was a clearer separation between church and state, rulers still claimed to be divinely appointed emperors. This shows that Caesaropapism was a product of the broader trend of centralizing power in medieval society, not an anomaly of Byzantine culture. This system was legitimized through both law and theology. According to the Corpus Juris Civilis of Emperor Justinian, the emperor is the sole representative of God on earth with the authority to legislate on both secular and religious matters. The role of religion in justifying this system is clearly shown in the theological writings of the period. John Chrysostom, one of the most influential church fathers, wrote, "Royal power is the reflection of divine power, and opposing the emperor is opposing God's will." According to research by Dr. Gilbert Dagron, published in Emperor and Priest, the imperial office in Byzantium, the Caesaropapist system operated according to a complex, multi-layered model. The selection of high-ranking church positions was entirely in the emperor's hands. Records show that the appointment of the Patriarch of Constantinople, the highest religious position after the emperor, always required imperial approval. From 381 to 1453, there were 203 patriarchs, of which 187 were directly chosen by the emperor or strongly influenced by the imperial court, according to statistics by scholar Vitalien Laurent. The operational process of this system followed a strict cycle. Research by Professor Cyril Mango shows that religious decision-making often began at the imperial court, was discussed in the National Council of Senior Officials, and then submitted to the emperor for final approval. This process usually lasted from 2 to 6 months for major decisions, with the participation of nobles, military leaders, and senior clergy. Oversight was carried out through a network of logothetes, imperial officials sent to monasteries and parishes to monitor the implementation of central directives. Archives at the Vatican Library show that by the 10th century, there were about 400 logothetes operating across the empire, each responsible for supervising 15 to 20 religious institutions. In terms of numbers, researchers estimate that the impact of this system was enormous. The total number of people directly affected by coercive religious policies was about 2 to 3 million during its peak from the 6th to the 11th century. The annual rate was estimated at around 15,000 to 25,000 people forced to relocate, convert, or face punishments related to their beliefs. The geographical distribution was concentrated mainly in border regions such as Anatolia and the Balkans, where many religious minorities lived, accounting for about 65% of cases. Those most affected were primarily between the ages of 12 and 60, making up 80% of the total, typically those of working age and capable of resistance. Dr. Anthony Breyer of the University of Birmingham remarked, "These numbers not only reflect the scale of the policy, but also show the systematic targeting of specific population groups. These were not random acts, but a planned strategy." These figures demonstrate the significant scale and systematic nature of using religious authority to control society in the Byzantine era. A key question is, why could Caesaropapism last so long, from the 4th to the 15th century? Research shows there were 3 main mechanisms that maintained the system. First was information control. Dr. Holden's research indicates that copying and distributing religious texts was entirely under the control of state-funded monasteries. A specific example is Emperor Leo III's order in 726 to confiscate and destroy all religious icons and to ban the creation of new religious art without state approval. Second was institutional protection. Legal records from the period show that anyone opposing the emperor's religious decisions was considered guilty of lèse-majesté, a crime of high treason, punishable by life imprisonment or death. This mechanism was enforced through a special court system called the Consistorium Sacrum, which dealt exclusively with religious cases. Third was the network of interests. According to Michael McCormick's analysis, the system generated enormous economic benefits for the senior clergy, nobility, and state officials. Patriarchs and bishops were granted land, tax exemptions, and the right to collect taxes from the population in their territories. This created a class whose material interests were tied to maintaining the system, making reform efforts face strong resistance from those who benefited. The impact of Caesaropapism is recorded from many angles by modern researchers. Psychologically, historical psychology studies by Dr. Judith Aron show that the system created what she calls learned helplessness within the community. People often felt unable to decide on their own spiritual lives, as evidenced by the rarity of independent, grassroots religious movements for nearly a millennium. Socially, the system caused divisions within communities. Families and communities were split along religious lines dictated by the state, leading to internal conflicts that lasted for generations. The iconoclasm crisis from 726 to 843 is a typical example, where families had members who supported and others who opposed the destruction of religious icons, creating deep fractures in Byzantine society. Culturally, anthropologist Dimitar Angelov points to a decline in religious diversity. Before Caesaropapism was established, Byzantine territories were home to many religions, including various Christian sects, Judaism, ancient Greek beliefs, and Eastern religions. By the 10th century, over 90% of the population was recorded as adhering to Byzantine Orthodox Christianity, reflecting strong cultural homogenization. Not everyone accepted Caesaropapism passively. Historical records note various forms of resistance throughout Byzantine history. From the 8th century, organized resistance movements appeared, particularly the iconophile movement during the iconoclasm period. This movement was large, with an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 direct participants, including both clergy and lay people. A particularly important role in the resistance belonged to monks and nuns. They used the monastic network to preserve old religious traditions and spread ideas opposing state policy. As recorded in the Vita of Saint Theodore Studite, monasteries became centers of cultural and religious resistance. Theodore and his associates secretly copied banned religious texts and maintained traditional rituals. The results of these resistance efforts show the complexity of the problem. On one hand, resistance movements succeeded in preserving some religious and cultural traditions, especially the restoration of iconography after 843. On the other hand, Caesaropapism still survived and continued to grow, showing that individual or small group resistance was insufficient to change a tightly organized power system. The Caesaropapist system finally ended in 1453 with the fall of the Byzantine Empire, but this end was not due to internal reform. Rather, it came from external factors. The main causes included military pressure from the Ottoman Empire, with more advanced military technology and larger forces, an economic crisis from the loss of major trade routes to the west and competition from Italian city-states, an internal weakening due to power struggles among nobles and the public's loss of trust in imperial leadership. As expert Donald Nicol wrote in the last centuries of Byzantium, the end of Caesaropapism was not the result of intellectual progress or religious reform, but the consequence of a rigid system unable to adapt to the changing times. This is an important lesson about the dangers of concentrating too much power in the hands of one person or a small group. When studying Caesaropapism in Byzantium, we see that similar models have appeared repeatedly in human history. The 16th to 17th centuries saw the cuius regio, ius religio system in Europe, where princes could determine the religion of their entire territory, as recognized in the Peace of Augsburg in 1555. The 20th century saw totalitarian systems like Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, where the state completely controlled citizens' intellectual and spiritual lives, with Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism noting significant parallels. Even in the 21st century, some countries still maintain state religion models with concentrated power, according to Freedom House's report on global religious freedom. This shows that the concentration of religious political power is a recurring pattern in history, as noted by Professor Charles Tilly in Coercion Capital and European States on the Formation of Modern States. Today, religious freedom worldwide still faces many challenges. According to the 2024 report by the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, about 4.9 billion people live in countries with moderate to severe restrictions on religious freedom. This figure shows that although much progress has been made in recognizing human rights, religious freedom remains a global challenge. Modern forms of religious power abuse, identified by Human Rights Watch, include forced religious conversion, restrictions on building places of worship, control over religious education, and using laws to discriminate against certain religions. These practices are particularly common in parts of Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and some regions of Africa and the Middle East. Comparing to the past, although the political and social context has completely changed, experts from Georgetown University's Religious Freedom Project note that the psychological and sociological mechanisms behind the abuse of religious authority have striking similarities to the Byzantine period. These include using religion to legitimize political power, controlling information, and creating vested interest groups tied to maintaining the status quo. From the historical lessons of Caesaropapism, the international community has developed many protective and preventive mechanisms. The modern international legal framework is built on the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, particularly Article 18 on freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. In addition, the 1966 International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the 1981 Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Intolerance and Discrimination, based on religion or belief, set specific standards for protecting religious freedom. monitoring mechanisms are implemented through many international organizations. The United Nations Human Rights Council has a special rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief, currently Mr. Ahmed Shahid, who monitors and issues annual reports on the global situation of religious freedom. The Council of Europe's Venice Commission also plays an advisory role for countries in building laws to ensure religious freedom. Education and awareness raising have become the focus of many international organizations. Educational programs on religious history and human rights are implemented in the school systems of more than 150 UNESCO member states. Amnesty International has developed training modules on identifying and combating religious discrimination, used by human rights activists worldwide. In academia, studies on Caesaropapism and the history of religious authority are evaluated through different schools of thought. The institutionalists, represented by scholars like Sergio Zambon, argue that this system was a natural result of institutional development in medieval society, based on the need to organize society and maintain order. They argue that in the absence of modern democratic mechanisms, combining religious and political power was a reasonable solution for governing a multi-ethnic empire. The critical theory school, represented by the work of Talal Asad and Judith Butler, counters this view by pointing out that Caesaropapism was an expression of systematic power abuse. They argue that the system was not natural, but the result of power groups using religion to justify imposing their will on the majority of the population. The evidence they present includes analysis of Byzantine propaganda texts showing the use of religious language to legitimize political policies. This debate is important because it affects how we understand the relationship between power and religion in modern society, and has practical implications for developing policies that protect religious freedom and prevent the abuse of religious power in today's world. The study of Caesaropapism in Byzantine history offers important lessons for modern society. On power, we learn that concentrating too much authority in the hands of one person or a small group, even for noble purposes, always carries the risk of abuse. The checks and balances that modern democracies apply are precisely lessons drawn from such historical experiences. On information, Byzantine history shows the importance of ensuring diverse sources of information and freedom of expression. When one organization has a monopoly on information, especially on spiritual and moral matters, society becomes easily controlled and manipulated. This is particularly relevant in the Internet age, when information control can be carried out more subtly. On community, the role of the community in protecting individual freedoms is irreplaceable. Successful resistance movements in Byzantine history all shared the characteristic of broad community support and a tightly organized network. This shows the importance of building strong civil society organizations as a shield for protecting freedom. As Dr. Kaldelis Alexander from Ohio State University noted in the Byzantine Republic, Byzantine history teaches us that democracy is not a one-time achievement, but a continuous process requiring vigilance from every generation. When people stop participating in monitoring power, power will seek to expand and abuse. By studying Caesaropapism in the Byzantine Empire, we have seen three key points. First, how religious and political power can combine to create a system of total social control with far-reaching consequences for millions over more than a millennium. Second, the importance of having checks and balances, as well as the role of community in protecting individual freedoms. And third, the necessity of learning from history to build institutions and laws that protect religious freedom and prevent the abuse of power in the modern world. These insights help us recognize that protecting religious freedom and human rights is not only the responsibility of governments, but also the duty of every citizen in a democratic society. History is not just to understand the past, but to build a better future. If this video has helped you better understand the importance of protecting religious freedom and preventing power abuse, please share it with others who care about building a fairer and freer society. Subscribe to the channel for more meaningful historical analysis that helps us better understand the origins of modern social issues and how to address them. And let me know in the comments, What do you think is the most important lesson from Caesaropapism that we can apply to protecting religious freedom today? Thank you for taking the time to explore this complex but necessary topic. Understanding history helps us become more responsible citizens in defending democratic values and human rights. We will meet again in the next video where we will continue to explore other important historical lessons. If you want, I can now adapt this translation into a documentary-style narration so it feels even more compelling for a YouTube historical video. Would you like me to do that next?